Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. My name is Ivana Harinkyu if you're new here, and if you're not, thank you for coming back. Today is Monday, June the 13th, and that means that we are just one day and a week away from the GOP runoff for that nomination to U.S. Senate. Now, I'm sure that you are getting to the point where you're probably tired of hearing about these political ads. You're probably tired of hearing more about this race, but again, that runoff is Tuesday, June the 21st, and is between Representative Mo Brooks and Katie Britt. Now, they are again facing off for that GOP nomination to the U.S. Senate for a seat that is being vacated by retiring Richard Shelby. Today, I'm joined by AL.com reporter Sarah Whites-Koditschek, and she is here today to talk about some polling data and a story she published this morning about how Katie Britt nearly won in Mo Brooks's backyard of North Alabama and what that means for the runoff coming up on Tuesday. There's a lot of interesting polling data here, a lot to talk about, Sarah. So we will jump in, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention first that on Friday, former President Donald Trump did endorse Katie Britt for this seat. Sarah, why is that a big deal right now, just a little bit over a week before that runoff?
It's a big deal right now because Mo Brooks has really pegged his campaign on being the Trump candidate. And it was a blow to him when Trump withdrew his support back in March. And recently he's been going on Twitter asking Trump to endorse him again. And it seems like it was because he's behind in the polls, his real strong last effort to turn that corner and catch up with Britt. And now that Trump has endorsed Britt, that's more bad news for Mo Brooks.
Right. And again, we know that Trump dropped that endorsement in late March of Mo Brooks. And recently, in the past week or two, Mo has been trying to get that endorsement back. He had some tweets on Twitter, and I believe the hashtag was re-endorse Mo there. Obviously, that re-endorsement did not come. And again, on Friday evening, late Friday afternoon, Donald Trump did announce his support for Katie Britt. She actually tweeted about it. I'm reading her tweet right now. She said, President Trump knows that Alabamians are sick and tired of failed, do-nothing career politicians. In the Senate, I will fight to defend Alabama values, advance the America First agenda, and preserve the American dream for generations to come. So that was her response there on Twitter to that endorsement. Now, Sarah, let's kind of pivot a little bit to some of this polling data and some of the data that you found, again, that you published this morning in a story on AL.com about how Katie Britt did specifically in North Alabama with these votes. That's a region that I think a lot of people assumed Mo Brooks would carry because he is from Huntsville and has traditionally seen more support in that North Alabama region. Katie Britt is from the South Alabama region. People kind of figure that where you're from, you can carry a little bit more votes. That wasn't necessarily true, though.
Right. Mo Brooks narrowly won in 3 counties in his district, the 5th congressional district. And generally, experts are telling me that is kind of unusual. Like typically you'd expect a candidate, as you said, to do well on their home turf. So he's struggling even at home. He only won 5 counties statewide in the primary. And in one county in his district, Jackson County, he lost by about 20 percentage points. So in the counties that he won, it was narrowly. He won in Madison County and Limestone and Morgan County narrowly.
And he has represented that district, the 5th congressional district, for 12 years, for a little bit about maybe a few days over that of 12 years. So that's a pretty long time for that region, for those voters, a lot of those voters to not cast their ballots there for Mo Brooks. Now, you had some of this data in your story. We're going to link it here so people can read it there. But this I thought was really interesting, Sarah. I'm looking down to make sure I get these numbers right. In Lauderdale County, these are all, again, North Alabama counties. Katie Britt passed Mo Brooks in Lauderdale County by almost 8 percentage points. And in Jackson County, again, that you just mentioned, by nearly 20. Now, Brooks did carry Limestone County, which is home to Athens. Again, people kind of think about Huntsville, Athens, Decatur in that kind of one region. Brooks did carry Limestone County and Morgan County, which is where Decatur is, by less than a single percentage point. So that is a very, very low margin there. The experts you spoke with, what did they have to say about that?
Well, so this part of Alabama is kind of interesting because, as you know, the space industry is headquartered there, and a lot of federal money and federal jobs have gone to creating that region and making it what it is. So there's a lot of big business groups there and people who are politically connected who, they say they recognize the value of those relationships and those connections in Washington. They feel that Senator Richard Shelby has made, a remarkable impact as the chair of the Appropriations Committee by helping Alabama get these contracts, and that Mo Brooks, as a really philosophically committed, very conservative person and politician, is not prioritizing those relationships, and he's not trying to, bring these resources to the state, and that he has been vocal and is sometimes seen as an embarrassment to the traditional wing of the Republican Party. And Katie Britt is largely seen as representing that wing, although she has done a lot to present herself as a conservative Christian candidate to the primary voters. So it's an interesting litmus in his home region, because while he is their representative, there's a kind of complex backstory there as to the mixed feelings about Mo Brooks. And on the other hand, as with very conservative voters who are really engaged in that area, I spoke with a local party official who owns a gun store, and he said, well, I'm a business owner, I'm a small business owner, and Mo Brooks has been endorsed by the NRA, and I trust that he really believes in the Second Amendment and conservative values. He's not going to compromise. So there is a strong base for Mo Brooks, also among very conservative, dedicated, Republican voters.
Well, and the trick there, especially in North Alabama, in that Huntsville region, I guess for Mo Brooks, is finding those voters that are in a city, a metropolitan area, which typically does have more Democratic voters, as we've seen in the country, finding those hardcore conservatives that will go out, will cast their votes for Mo. And another thing I think is interesting, you kind of touched on, is the difference between the office that Mo Brooks holds now as a U.S. representative versus the Senate. Now, we've had a Senator, Richard Shelby, in office for decades and decades. And again, he has brought home a lot of money to Alabama with his position in the Senate. There are people who quite possibly would vote for Brooks as a U.S. representative, but when they look at him in the eyes of being one of just 2 senators in the state and being responsible for bringing money back home and for other responsibilities, they might not have as much faith and cast their ballot there.
Yeah, it's interesting. Depending on who you speak with, if you speak with a Mo Brooks supporter, this gun owner I mentioned, he said, well, Brooks has this relationship with Trump, and Trump supported some of the space industry. So why shouldn't we credit Mo Brooks with any of the financial gains that this region has seen? And I also thought it was interesting in his endorsement of Britt, Trump mentioned Britt's her business background and her focus on the economy in Alabama, which is interesting because for some people that's a detriment that she's in the pocket of big business. So yes, I'm sorry, I forgot your question. What was it?
No, it wasn't necessarily a question, yeah. just more comment on that. Now, another thing you mentioned that I thought was really interesting was turnout. Now, we saw in the May primary, again, Katie Britt carried most of the state. She had about 45% of the vote. She needed 50% to not enter a runoff. Obviously, that didn't happen. She's going into that runoff with Mo Brooks. Third place in that race was Mike Durant, the former Army pilot there, whose story has been told in Black Hawk Down. Mike Durant came in third there, about 7 or 8 percentage points behind Mo Brooks. So that was what pushed Mo Brooks into this runoff. Now, Mo Brooks says that he thinks some of his vote, some of that North Alabama vote, was kind of divvied up between he and Mike Durant, because Mike Durant is also a Huntsville-based resident.
Right. So this has been a speculative question. If Mike Durant's voters went to the polls, would that push and voted for Mo Brooks, would that push him to be up neck and neck with Katie Britt? She's polling about 54% right now, and he's polling about 36% right now, despite that. But some experts I've spoken with think that those voters cannot be counted on, because they may not come back. They may not be motivated to come back. They may be the type of voters that are already leaning towards an independent candidate, and that Mike Durant promoted himself as being an outsider to politics. And so they might be less likely to participate in politics, or they might be more jaded by longstanding political candidates. So the turnout in the primary was slightly low. I think 22% of registered voters, like slightly lower than previous years, but not not unheard of. And it's expected that the runoff turnout will be lower. So the question would be, who is going to be motivated to come out? And there's data showing that more educated voters are more likely to vote. And also that Katie Britt is more likely to appeal to educated voters. So these are interesting questions, but in his home turf, because Mike Durant is from Huntsville, Brooks and his supporters believe that he will get their support there.
Well, and it's a fair point for Mo Brooks to make, to say, look, we know that, again, we've talked about candidates typically bringing in their kind of home turf. If his home turf was split in two, it would make sense logically that was also split in two by the voters. Some people picked one candidate that lived in the same area while others picked another. So that makes sense. That's fair. The question here is, though, those Mike Durant voters, as you mentioned, will they come back out and vote in the runoff either for Katie Britt or for Mo Brooks? It doesn't really matter. It's just if they show up in the first place, which is a huge question mark. We know that people typically don't show up to the polls unless they are specifically jazzed about a candidate or maybe an issue, a specific race. But the candidate and the feelings about a candidate really motivate people to go to the polls. So if you were head over heels for Mike Durant, I know I was at that campaign party that night and saw people crying. They were so upset about his loss there. And if you were that passionate about Mike Durant or another candidate, are you going to be able to translate that passion and go out to the polls and cast your ballot? That is, I think, a big question. We could talk about who would get the votes, but first the votes have to be cast in the first place.
Yeah, and so if you think about like what a small fraction of people will go vote in a primary runoff, they are the most dedicated voters for the Republican Party. And beyond that, another important factor here is that Katie Britt has considerably more financial resources going for her than Mo Brooks does. So she's able to pay for television ads and billboards and presumably staff to go get out the vote and to remind people to go to the polls. And that makes a big difference. And that is probably why we haven't seen like a huge ad campaign by Mo Brooks in the past few weeks, because he is not traditionally known as someone who's been able to fundraise and fundraise with a lot of money. And he has less than a quarter, as of like most recent federal reports, of the cash on hand that her campaign has, because she's been supported, among other people, by Senator Shelby and PACs that represent Mitch McConnell and other Washington and Alabama Republicans in high places.
Well, and for those numbers, so the latest federal filings, this is from May 4th. So a little bit over a month ago there. So we can assume things have changed a little bit. But from those last public filings on May 4th, Katie Britt had over $2 million on hand for her campaign, and Mo Brooks had just over $677,000. That is I'm not great at math, but that's a $1.5 million difference or so there, just in that cash on hand for the campaigns. And that can make a huge difference, as you mentioned, when running specifically in this runoff. It's just the two of them. You're not competing with a lot of other people on a lot of other different issues. You're competing with one person. It's a one-on-one runoff. So that the way that money is going to come to play in is also going to be interesting. Now, this runoff again is Tuesday, the 21st. And Sarah, tell people again who can vote in this runoff. Not everybody in the state can run out to vote. So tell us who can.
Republican primary voters can turn out to vote. And, I just think this is an interesting race because it started out as this question: can the populist pro-Trump candidate Mo Brooks beat out against the traditional traditional party representative Katie Britt? And how will Trump's influence shape this race? And all of that has been, I think, pretty unexpected and pretty kind of up and down. So it's been interesting, and I'm curious to see what happens on Tuesday.
It's going to be an interesting next 8 days for all of us paying attention, Sarah. Now, again, you can vote in that runoff if you voted in the Republican primary in May, or if you didn't vote at all. You cannot vote in that runoff if you voted in the Democratic primary in May. So just a quick note there before you head out to the polls if you are not going to be eligible there. Thank you again so much, Sarah, for breaking this all down for us. We're going to leave a link to your reporting here where people can read it and can kind of really dive in on these numbers that we've just talked about. So again, thank you so much for your reporting. Everybody watching, thank you so much. We'll see you tomorrow.